The objectives for this lesson are finding equations of line given a parallel or perpendicular line and some other piece of information like a point. And so first, before we do those two examples, we're going to start with just some reminders. The equation of a straight line is y equals mx plus c, where m is the gradient and tells us how steep the line is, and c tells us where the line crosses the y-axis or the y-intercept. Parallel lines have the same gradient but different y-intercepts. So in order to tell lines are parallel, you're comparing that m value. And so that m value should be exactly the same. And if it's the same and they have different c values, then they're parallel lines. They're never going to actually cross. Perpendicular lines are a little bit different. So you're going to, again, look at the gradient, but you're going to have to do a little bit of math or notice if they're opposite and different signs. And so in order to tell two lines are perpendicular, the two slopes should multiply together to get -1. And so we're going to actually work through a perpendicular example first, since that's a little bit harder. So we're going to find the equation of a line which is perpendicular to this line and goes through the point 9, 5. Okay, so remember this coordinate point gives us an x and a y to work with. And then this information right here is going to help us find the m. And then remember, we want to find the equation y equals mx plus c. So then the work we're going to have to do is to find the c value. But first, we actually have to know a little bit about perpendicular lines. So this line is not the line we're looking at. This is a perpendicular line to the one we're trying to find. And so y equals -1/3 x plus 8 is just perpendicular to our line. Now, on the last slide, I talked about how this slope and my line's slope have to multiply to be -1. So I have to figure out what I multiply by to get -1. Now we can solve this equation, and in order to do that, I'm going to multiply both sides by -3. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is to clear this fraction. Okay, so I'm multiplying by 3/1. Another way you can think about it is I'm multiplying by 1/3, so I need to divide by 1/3. Well, dividing by 1/3 is the same as multiplying by 3/1. So if you know your fraction rules with multiplication division, that's what I'm using here. And so what happens over here is I'm just left with my 1x, and then on this side I get +3. And so this, what I just solved for, perhaps I should have used m here, this is actually my slope. So the slope of my line has to multiply to make -1 with the slope of this line. Since this slope is -1/3, my slope has to be +3, because +3 times -1/3 makes -1. Little bit hard to get used to, but once you do notice patterns. Just real quick off to the side, for example, if my slope was 2, then my perpendicular line slope would be -1/2. If my slope was 1/4, then my perpendicular slope would be -4, and so on. So hopefully you kind of see a pattern there. Once you work out a few of these problems, it does get a little bit quicker. So I found my m, and I have an x and a y. So I'm going to actually use my equation now. Y equals mx plus c. I'm going to plug in my new m that I just found, and I'm going to plug in this x and y. And so I get 27 plus c is equal to 5. So now I'm going to subtract 27 from both sides to figure out what that c value is. So 5 minus 27 is negative 22. So that's what c has to be. So now I found my c and I found my m. So I have my final answer. Y equals 3x minus 22. And for my parallel example, there's a lot less work, which is nice. Remember, parallel lines have the exact same slope. So my line will also have a slope of 2 because it's parallel to this line. And this gives me an x and a y to work with. So now I can just go straight to that last step that we did in the first example. Y equals mx plus c. I'm going to plug in my x and y. So 10 is equal to 2 times x plus c. So I plugged in the slope and I plugged in the x and the y. 10 is equal to 2 plus c. Subtract 2. And I get c is equal to 8. So now I know my c, I know my m, so I have my final answer. Y equals 2x plus 8. I hope that this helps clarify. Please feel free to send me any other questions.